our Lord Jesus Christ according to St. Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus said, "You have heard that was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're on your way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Rules and regulations. I think most of us understand the need for them, and I think most of us have at one time or another been exasperated by them. Rules are made to guide, to protect, to preserve our health and welfare, and whether it's the rules of the household or the rules of state, Lord knows we have plenty of those. They are in a place for a reason. But that doesn't mean we like all of them. Sometimes we feel constrained. Our freedom may be a little limited, or they're outdated and just plain silly. And maybe there are times when we try to observe the rules and out of ignorance or misunderstanding, we unintentionally break them. Or maybe what is most aggravating, perhaps like me, you've had a fellow in a uniform get out of his car with all the flashing lights to explain to you what exactly a full stop and a stop sign really means. Or maybe you waited in a registration line for an hour only to be told by a clerk that you filled out the wrong form. And you have to go back and do it all over again. And maybe what is most aggravating, the 21st century society is when the rules are changed just when your hopes are raised. Maybe just before that position you were so looking forward to finally became available, and the management decided to change the job description, and you no longer were qualified. Changing the rules can carry a sting. The American humorist Sam Levinson used to tell wonderful stories about his childhood growing up around the time of the Great Depression. In one story, he related the lessons he learned from his mother, who apparently was not averse to changing the rules now and again. One night, before they were ready to sit down to the family dinner, some relatives dropped by. And Mother Levinson, being the most hospitable person she could be, invited them to join her family at the table. And of course, they gratefully accepted. Mother then went to the kitchen, taking all her children with her. And when they were alone, she brought them in close and in a low voice said, "Children, we do not have enough chicken to feed us and our guests. So when the plate is passed around, please do not take a piece for yourself." The children agreed, of course, and dutifully did what their mother asked. None of them took a piece of chicken. When the meal was finished and Mother Levinson stood to clear the table, before she picked up the dish, she announced that there was chocolate cake for dessert, but not for those who didn't take the chicken. Changing the rules, moving the goalposts. I suppose Mother Levinson's children may have thought so. On the other hand, I think there was a valuable lesson in hospitality. Creative hospitality, perhaps, but she found a way to stretch the food and to provide a meal for her guests. Her children did not go hungry, and they had a chance to learn something about generosity, giving, sacrifice, and kindness. The moral lesson may have come at the expense of some chicken and dessert, but in time they would come to see it was the right thing to do. Now, knowing what's the right thing to do can be confusing at times, especially when the lesson comes at the expense of long-seated expectations, when it seems like someone is trying to change the rules. At first reading, it may appear that this is what Jesus is doing in what we know as the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew's Gospel, this set of teachings goes on for 3 chapters, 107 verses. We heard a portion of this last week about salt and light. And this week and next, we will hear about the Old Testament rules and how they are being reimagined by Jesus. In a series of antitheses, or what others call statements of opposition to the law of Moses and the rabbinic tradition, Jesus reviews them and acknowledges these laws, but teaches his disciples to examine what is behind them. They hear Jesus say, "You have heard it was said, but I say to you." Now you recall that Jesus clearly states that he has come not to abolish these laws, but has come to fulfill them. You have heard it said, Jesus tells them, that you shall not murder, but I say, control your anger. Reconcile with those with whom you have a dispute. Settle your differences before you come to worship. For if you don't, you devalue the person whom God has created. And it's not just your own anger, but do not cause anger in another person. Jesus is focusing on anger as the root cause of much violence. You have heard it said, Jesus says, that you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, lust for another, if you lust for another, you have committed adultery already in your heart. It's the underlying cause of adultery that Jesus is speaking to, the inner feelings we allow us to objectify others to satisfy some physical need. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis, if someone looks lustfully at a plate of ham and eggs, he has already committed breakfast in his heart. Pay attention. Pay attention, Jesus says, to the inner attitude, not just the outward actions. In a bit of what most commentators describe as hyperbole, Jesus says, if your eye is the cause of sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's strong language and taken as a sign of the seriousness with which Jesus is speaking. But the metaphors are not to be taken literally. After all, we don't hear a lot about disciples with one eye and one arm. But the point, rather, is to remove anything from one's life that will lead to sin, to that which would separate the individual from God. You have heard it said, Jesus explains that you shall not swear falsely, but I say to you, do not swear at all. A person of integrity does not need to call upon heaven or earth to support their commitment. All they need is a yes or a no. Jesus again is driving the point home. Sin is just about what we do. Sin isn't just about what we do. It's also what we think about. So what's happening here? Is Jesus just moving the goalposts? Has he taken the bar of righteousness and raised it a bit higher? We've done this and this, but now we must do this. Perhaps Jesus is teaching us to be more attentive to our way of thinking, to realize we're called to a higher accountability, not just for our actions, but the intent behind those actions. Our innermost being is challenged to go beyond conforming to the letter of the law and to live the life God has intended for us to live. In the words of N.T. Wright, the Sermon on the Mount isn't just about how to behave. It's about discovering the living God in the loving, dying Jesus and learning to reflect that love ourselves into the world which needs it so badly. This is not to say that this new awareness is something that comes easily. G.K. Chesterton famously wrote that the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and not tried. The good news for us is that we have been given the will by grace to strive for all that we are asked to do. It may take some imagination, some measure of trust, and perhaps a little courage. But we have an example in God. It's Jesus who embodied the way of self-giving love, which is the deepest fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Come, let's follow him.